Gonna turn on a recording. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nancy Lopez. I'm a board member with DC Refers, and I'm really glad to welcome everyone to DC Refers Reconnect. We had initially planned for this to be a two-organization reconnect with Alana Brown from the Safe Sisters Circle and Melody Webb from the Mothers Outreach Network. Alana had to not join us today because of a family medical emergency, but we are really excited to hear from Melody Webb and learn more about the Mothers Outreach Network. Before we begin, I'm going to tell you a little bit about DC Refers. It's an online network of qualified lawyers and mediators who are willing to represent modest means clients at below market rates. What we learned was that there are hundreds of thousands of residents in DC who are people of modest means. They have regular jobs and they earn too much to qualify for free legal services. At the same time, they don't earn enough to pay market rates to hire a lawyer. So when they face a legal problem, they're often stuck in the middle with nowhere to go. It's that justice gap that we are trying to fill. People of modest means have all kinds of different legal problems. What we discovered this year at DC Refers was that some of the most sought after practice areas were family law, landlord-tenant, employment, business matters, consumer protection, criminal and traffic, civil rights, personal injury, estates and wills. All of these things are really important for people and things that we don't think folks should have to face the legal system alone when they have things that are such critical parts of their lives that are in balance. In 2022, DC Refers served over 600 people. Some of those just came to us requesting legal help. Some received consultations, brief advice and referrals. And then about 45 people secured a lawyer to represent them in court for their legal matter. We hope that if you're a lawyer or a mediator, you'll consider joining our panel. Some of the reasons you might want to do that is that it's a great source of client referrals for people of all different income levels, people who fall into that 200 to 400% of the federal poverty guidelines get the low bono rate, but clients who earn more than 400% of the federal poverty guidelines, you could charge your regular market rates. It's also a great way to fulfill your ethical obligation for pro bono publico service. Lawyers should be giving back, and this is one way to do it, especially for solo and small firm lawyers where pro bono might be a challenge. You can connect with other small firm and solo practitioners, and we do lots of different kinds of professional development, and you can be a part of that community. Our application is pretty simple. As long as you have 2 years of experience, are a member in good standing of the DC Bar, have malpractice insurance and positive professional references, we will vet and screen and then approve you to be on our panel. We've had a great year of DC Refers Reconnect, and we're right now planning what we will be doing next year. And that happens because of our great board of directors and program coordinator. So we wanted to take a chance to say thank you to those people and also to all of the lawyers and mediators on our panel. So that is a little bit about DC Refers. Then I'm going to stop sharing and introduce you to Melody Webb, who's the executive director of the Mothers Outreach Network. Melody is a graduate of Harvard University and Harvard Law School and has had a long career of public service in many different organizations. She has worked with the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless on Capitol Hill. She was the legal director of the Employment Justice Center and worked with Neighborhood Legal Services Program. She was a CCAN lawyer doing child abuse and neglect cases, and she worked with the George Washington University Legal Clinics. And now she's started a new nonprofit called Mothers Outreach Network. And I am so excited to hear more about where that idea came from and what they're doing and all of the ways that they're growing. I think it's so important for everyone into DC to know what other legal services organizations are doing, because together we can do more than we can apart. So Melody, let me hand it over to you and tell us more about the Mothers Outreach Network.
I will definitely do that. And thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm really honored to be here among what looks like a bunch of familiar colleagues, people I've worked with over the years, and also with people that I have not worked with. Thank you, Nancy and DC Refers, for inviting me here. And again, thank you all for this opportunity to present. Know this is like the holiday season, and you've chosen to spend the time listening to what we do at Mothers Outreach Network. And I hope that we can in some way partner as a result of this, this conversation that I think we're going to have ultimately today. So I want to set the stage by Nancy has given you some very specific background on me, and that's great. I want to tell you a little about our approach to lawyering, and my approach to lawyering, which informs the organization, is very much informed by the multiple poverty law practice areas I've practiced in and the wonderful legal services community here in DC. You know, I'm practicing across different types of advocacy. I was just talking to Nancy before this presentation started about how I really got my start through Equal Justice Works, and that model of Equal Justice Works, their fellowships has actually influenced the way that we developed this organization. And Equal Justice Works at the time was called National Association for Public Interest Law. So I'm dating myself in the early years of the fellowship program, where they took this sort of disciplinary, multifaceted approach to addressing systemic issues. So that sort of, just to give you that context, in my fellowship, I engaged in direct representation and policy advocacy. And so I've taken that approach over the course of my career, sometimes some parts of it in some jobs, and Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. Patty Fugere will know that I always say that that job was, you know, one of the most fantastic jobs I've ever had, because I had the chance to represent clients directly, but also to use that to inform the policy advocacy. And I think she's been a pioneer in that model. And that's the model we are trying to bring to this organization. So the diverse practice background, again, has been very helpful. But what I want to talk to you briefly about is my past practice as a solo parents attorney on the Council for Child Abuse and Neglect is what directly led me to this point today in the organization's history. I served as a parents defense attorney, family defense attorney, and that specific practice area is what has informed what we're doing right now most directly. And just in terms of context, my philosophy is really informed by some of the sort of the school of lawyering known as movement lawyering. And that framework, I think, is laid out really well in a number of articles, but particularly one that is authored by Jim and Lexi Freeman. And I'm truncating the title, but it essentially is Power, Not Policy. And so we really try to build power in client communities, and it forms how we practice, how we govern our organization increasingly, and the goals that we set as an organization. So just as sort of pulling back, so Mothers Outreach Network is a 501c3 nonprofit advocacy and racial justice organization. We actually started over 10 years ago. We started at a terrible time where the economy was like tanking, and we at that time wanted to serve as a group that was providing both legal services and know your rights training, and then policy advocacy. So we weren't very successful in raising funds to staff the organization. So we pulled back and then essentially engaged in outreach and education work. And we've done that on a volunteer basis with an all volunteer board, pretty much of all lawyers until recently. And if anybody out there is interested in learning about our board, we are in the process of trying to grow it. So we welcome inquiries. And so we took like many years, and then during the pandemic, where it was just increasingly apparent that there needed to be new approaches to addressing poverty, that sort of kind of breathed some life into our organization's work, where we had only been engaging in outreach and sort of know your rights training. But we started to convene groups of people online, virtually, to talk about ways to address poverty. And so in November of 2020, we were holding meetings, in the evenings, and we started off by talking about the universal basic income as a way to address poverty. We ultimately formed the DC Guaranteed Income Coalition. And what came next was we sort of were able to create and revive our legal program. So that's a little bit just to, kind of clarify. So the organization became a staffed organization about a year ago. And so our mission is that we work to support and work with Black mothers in DC in the struggle to transform the government income and child welfare policies, practices, and laws. That's a mouthful. But essentially, our work focuses on Black family preservation through addressing poverty and also specific family law matters that relate to the child welfare system. I'll give you a brief overview of some of the policy issues with child welfare, and I'll later go into some of the statistics, and I'll ask Nancy to stop me when I'm going a little over. I know that we had timed this for Alana to be involved, but essentially Black families in DC suffer overrepresentation in both, the populations of those who are poor and those who are impoverished and those who are in the child welfare system. The child welfare system, for those who aren't as steeped in what's going on in that field, it's known as family policing, family regulation, as well by advocates. And we work in our organization addresses this issue in three primary areas around preventing poverty to strengthen families and avoid involvement and identification by actors in the system. Child welfare, I could spend a long time defining what that system is, but I think most people on the call know that it is, the individuals who are agency, Child and Family Services agency employees, attorneys who are prosecuting these cases, judges and vendors who provide foster care services and other services to parents who are in the system. And so our work falls into these categories. So we engage in mobilization work known as organizing, education, civic engagement, on policy initiatives and know your rights. So that's the work we do directly with impacted people, and then coalitions and stakeholders who are in work with the impacted people across, sort of collectively in different ways. We also engage in policy advocacy around this area of child welfare, family regulation, and on poverty-related matters. And then legal advocacy that is direct representation related to the child protection system, welfare system, and the child welfare system specifically. What we're doing is we're doing sort of what we call pre-petition advice and counsel to parents, giving them help in looking at safety plans and other items that come up before a case is petitioned, when it could be anywhere from the investigation phase of a case where Child Protection Services is inquiring about reports that are made and other ways that they come through to the agency's awareness, all the way up until a petition might be filed. We don't represent parents currently after petition is filed for a number of reasons, but primarily at this point, we don't have capacity. It doesn't quite fit with what we're doing. It might be in the future we would do that, but there's a panel of attorneys that are appointed counsel who do that at this time. Right now, there is no right to counsel in the pre-petition phase, and there's a lot of advocacy we're doing around that for a number of reasons. So the tax clinic work we've been doing came out of the child tax credit of 2021, which you all know, I'm sure that it was fully refundable. People who were never ever eligible for that were suddenly eligible, and we know it cut child poverty in half when it was for people who were eligible. And the Child Protection Register representation work we do is very important. This is after a parent has been included in the post-inclusion phase. They have a right to appeal their inclusion. And so we are representing and advising parents with respect to getting their records expunged. And I'm happy to talk to people about that work, offline if people are seeing those cases. We also have something of a different sort of social science research project that we're undertaking, but from that angle, you can look at it, or you can look at it as a cash pilot program. We know it as a guaranteed income program, similar to that one, those that are being undertaken across the country. Our cash pilot program seeks to provide funding, regular payments that don't require the person to work to qualify for them. And we will give that to a group of moms whose children are involved in the child welfare system. The idea is to demonstrate, and this is a hypothesis because we're working on this with research institutions. It's a hypothesis that if you provide cash to parents who are involved in the system, given our belief that it is a poverty-driven system, that people come to the attention of the agency because of poverty, if you provide them with cash, that you will see many of the issues resolve that bring them to the attention of the agency. So that is a very exciting project that we are in the stages of now, obtaining names of people who might be eligible. So we're recruiting people to participate in that. And we would love to work with any provider organizations who think that they have parents who might be eligible. We can share more later. So that's sort of an overview of our program. I want to just pull back and talk a little bit about my work as an attorney and why I'm doing this, just to really hone in on what brought me to this approach. So I was a CCAN attorney on the panel, which is sort of a 4-year rotation. So I was on for 2 4-year rotations. I was not representing parents for the entire 8 years. I like to say to people, there's a lot of vicarious trauma working on these cases, nothing like the trauma that the parents are experiencing. But I worked on these cases, and I, as a parent defender, over 10 years ago. And what was always striking to me, there were 2 things: that most of the parents' issues were clearly traceable to their poverty. And then the other was just the extreme disadvantage at which attorneys are when they are representing parents in these cases. There are a number of process problems, sort of due process issues that are lacking for parents in the system. We think they are most evident in this pre-petition phase, where they are not informed of their rights, where they don't have a right to counsel. So essentially, when we receive those cases as appointed counsel, that we receive them the day of. Usually the hearings were held in the morning of the probable cause hearing is when we received our cases and had to put on some type of defense with regard to whether the government, had probable cause to remove the children. And so the deck was stacked against us as the lawyers. It was stacked against the parents as well. And so what I always say is it felt kind of like an assault, and you were trying to hold off like a tide that was, fast coming on. And as valiantly as I fought, and I made like no money as an attorney taking these cases because I put lots of hours into defending my client, it pretty much felt impossible every step of the way. And the things I noted again, that compounding the parents' pre-existing poverty is the fact that they lost their benefits that were associated with having children in their household. They lost their housing, or they were moved to smaller units, became less eligible for housing. So I had parents who would be in family shelter who would then be forced to move into single shelter. That led to homelessness because many of the women were not willing to stay in some of the single procedural shelters that they did not find desirable. And then the parents were charged with reunifying with their children with even fewer resources than they had before. Parents would lose their request to have their children placed with their preferred relative caregiver. And I would often see that the children would be placed with relatives with which the parent did not have strong relationships, almost as if every preference of the parent was questioned and doubted, even when any objective observer could see that their preferred caregiver was a perfectly good placement. So I view the system as having lots of built-in injustices against parents. And again, my core concern is that we should be fighting the poverty that the children and their parents are undergoing. There are poverty factors that can lead to involvement in the system. If you all have looked at the provisions in the code, lack of shelter, lack of housing, lack of food. So, on and on and on. There are specific poverty related reasons that can serve as a basis. And while there are, kind of provisions in the code that say it should not be the sole reason for removal, these are factors that can influence a removal and that are often at the root. So we are, essentially punishing parents for their poverty. I'm going to just go back to quickly say that I'm not sure I am on my time, Nancy, but there are a lot of different ways that people can get involved. And you can serve as, we have policy research for people who want to get involved. We in our guaranteed income work, for example, where we're seeking not just to run our own pilot program, but to have the city fund a new program that would provide cash payments to everyone who lives below the poverty line, and would not require work and would not place any other strings on that money. We formed the Guaranteed Income Coalition that is essentially trying to get legislation of this type passed. That coalition was successful in getting the city to approve funding of $1.5 million for guaranteed income pilots. The city awarded that money to one organization. There were some problems with the way they did it, but they did award the funds. And there should be any moment now some information coming out about the results of that program. What they funded was a program for mothers, women who were pregnant, I think, who had children under the age of 1 year old. And they were provided about $1,000 a month for a year. And I think we're coming up on that year. And the hope is that we will see that there were very positive outcomes for those mothers. And in essence, we're trying to get the city to fund additional allocations for guaranteed income programming. The idea is not to have pilots indefinitely, but to actually see that the pilots prove the point that individuals in different circumstances actually see improvements in their lives and lives of their families, and that they ultimately we will have a universal permanent program around the city. It's essentially a brand new program to shore up the existing safety net. So I'm going to stop there, Nancy, if you like, and I can say more, but I'm not sure about my time. If you.
Yeah, I want to give people a chance to ask questions.
Absolutely.
So much of what you have said is both heartbreaking and infuriating and inspiring, with the possibilities about what could happen to make things better. So I want to invite people to either put a question in the chat or just come off of mute and ask. And I know that there are guaranteed income pilot projects happening in cities all around the country. And I'm curious, do you know how big the one in DC is? How many participants they had?
Yes, so they had about 130 participants in that program, and it was, again, for 1 year. And we want them to fund additional, pilots opportunities. So we'll see. I mean, we're going to be fighting for that. And I hope others who are interested will, join in and work with our coalition. We have a strategy we, are pursuing for funding levels for 750 households over a 3-year period. And a hold harmless fund, because in conjunction with with this new benefit, families experience potential losses of their existing safety net benefits. So the hold harmless fund would try to compensate them for any losses they experience in other safety net programs. But there is new legislation which we need some policy, to implement it, but it is going to protect the TANF and other local benefits of pilot participants, which is really a great development.
And so what do you think the next step of growth is for Mothers Outreach Network?
Well, so, I mean, we're trying to engage in, more advocacy around, the child welfare system. So for example, tomorrow there's a hearing on their new diversion, safety planning and informal family planning is what what they describe it as. And it's known more commonly as the hidden foster care system. And there's a lot of, I think, engagement with other providers to watch that as it gets implemented. And we will weigh in tomorrow as to what we think, the gaps are and the problems are with that process. And if you want to, I can take a minute to just kind of quickly explain. So essentially, the hidden foster care system is just as it sounds. Rather than open a case and remove a child from, a home, the intention is to place them with known safe kinship relative caregivers, relatives, and even fictive kin, and to avoid placing a child, in the traumatic kind of circumstance of a foster home, tearing them away from all their family members. And the problem is that the parent is involved in but not enough. The parent knows this arrangement is occurring, but the parents need counseling and guidance. Now, a parent I was talking to today said, and I don't think they're doing enough to help us keep our kids in our homes to begin with. So in those circumstances where the agency determines that the child cannot remain safely in the home, but they believe there is a safe relative placement, they initiate the sort of agreement with the parent around a safety plan, which is essentially, we're discovering more and more, the safety plan then later on in a custody case, where if there's a contested case between a parent and that relative caregiver, the judges are looking at those safety plans. And they're looking at a substantiated charge. So those sorts of issues, which I think a lot of providers are running into, but just kind of connecting the dots so we understand the parents are operating in a sort of a lawless environment where they don't have any representation. So that's sort of our next kind of mission, really, to just spread the word and list, partners in addressing these areas.
Thank you. The work that you're doing is so important. It's a niche that wasn't being filled in DC, and I wish you all the best as you continue to grow. I hope that those who are on the call will, reach out if they have ways to support or are interested in getting involved. And I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today and taking time to learn more about Mothers Outreach Network and DC Refers. Everybody have a good afternoon. We will see you in the new year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.